Hey, let's talk Artian weapons. Artian weapons are the strongest weapons in the game at launch, and one of the big questions floating around right now, especially for Lance players, is what do we want to look for in an Artian weapon? And it's actually quite a complicated question. The first time I wrote this script, I went all in on a 40-minute deep dive into the complicated reasons why there isn't really a right answer on how you want to build an Artian weapon, but the fact of the matter is, the question of what should you be looking for in an Artian weapon doesn't really warrant a 40-minute video. And ironically, spending that length of time talking about Artian weapons is exactly the problem with trying to optimize an Artian weapon. So, in short, the difference between weapons is really small. Assuming an Artian weapon has 1 sharpness and 4 attack, compared to an Artian weapon with 1 sharpness and 4 element, and also assuming a bunch of other factors, like what combo you're using and what monster you're attacking, then the difference of expected damage between the two Artian versions is like 5 damage per hit, which just isn't all that much. And to put that into perspective, let's look at it from a different point of view. Opportunity cost is the cost of losing alternative possibilities when you choose one option over another. If my options are going to the movies or going to a restaurant, then by choosing the movies, I've missed out on a nice meal out. But if I choose a restaurant, then I miss out on an enjoyable evening watching a film. We can't craft Artian weapons how we want them to. We have to hunt a tier 3 tempered monster to get some Artian parts, and then once we get the correct ones, we pump them full of Orichalcite to randomly gain stats. This takes a lot of time. Getting an Artian roll to exactly be what you want is also extremely rare, and if you want a perfect roll for each element and each status, you're going to be here for a very, very long time. Especially so if you want to be truly optimal, because you sort of want both a fully invested attack Artian weapon and a fully invested element weapon for each elemental type at different points and different monsters and with different hunting styles, but I'll probably touch on that later. The opportunity cost of trying to obtain optimum Artian weapons is that you're locking yourself into the Artian grind. Let's look at it this way. If you build a damage-focused armor set, you can increase your damage output by about 50%. I think 49.3 if we want to be specific. And the amount of time it takes to make that set and the decorations in it takes, like an hour or 2 of hunting. Artian weapons, on the other hand, could easily be upwards of 100 hunts just for one perfect Artian roll. And that roll is going to be a 5% damage bonus over a bad roll, but obviously you'll roll something that is acceptable pretty quickly. So the real situation you're looking at will be like a 2% damage increase for an 100-hour grind. And looking at the opportunity cost, if you spend 100 hours of focused practice with the Lance, you'd probably have a bigger damage increase than 2%. Because of that, hunting for the perfect Artian weapon just doesn't seem like a good deal to me. Of course, that's not to say that the Artian weapons are a trap or that they're not worth it, so let's reframe the question. What does a decent Artian weapon look like? The first thing to think about is sharpness. You need enough sharpness to last an area while fighting. With razor sharp, and especially a razor sharp / handicraft duel, 1 sharpness mod seems like plenty. If you end up rolling 2 sharpness mods, that isn't the end of the world either. I'd consider that extra comfortable. And if you find that you're dropping sharpness mid-fight, and you don't want to play with sneaky sharpening shenanigans, then you may find that 2 sharpness mods is actually preferable. But you also might find that 2 sharpness mods is enough sharpness for you to not use any sharpness protection on your lance, and that means that you could swap out your razor sharp decoration for a more offensive decoration instead. And again, assuming that sharpness is no issue when you have your 2 sharpness mods on the Artian weapon, then you could replace razor sharp 3 with attack boost 3, and that's effectively trading 1 attack mod on your Artian weapon for the sharpness, which means that your sharpness on your decoration becomes attack. And because attack boost 3 is 7 raw, you're actually gaining 2 raw overall. But again, this is at the cost of a sharpness mod, so it's going to be really tight in terms of sharpness. On the flip side, anything more than 2 sharpness mods is probably too much sharpness, and at that point you ought to re-roll it. So let's say you're rolling up some Artian weapons, and you're using this as a guide to determine if the weapon is good. At this point, you have passed the first stage of your little checklist. You've got the correct amount of sharpness for what you want. The second stage you want to look at is Affinity. So the short and sweet answer is avoid it like the plague. Compared to attack, Affinity is very easy to build a set for, and the natural 5% of Affinity that you get on all Artians that are built with 3 attack parts is more than enough Affinity than you will need on most of your armor sets. Now, there are caveats. If you really hate some of the Affinity skills that are currently meta, like Weakness Exploit or Maximum Might, or if you're a time traveler and you know that we'll want to be running some crazy powerful attack increasing armor skills instead of the Affinity skills in a later title update, then there is an argument that Affinity could be helpful. But outside of those very niche situations, and let's be real, crazy hypotheticals, you don't want Affinity. And in my opinion, it is not difficult to roll something without Affinity, and so keep rolling your weapons until you don't have it. Finally, we come to the question of attack versus element/status. There is a bit of a difference between a status weapon and an element weapon. For status weapons, you want to prioritize attack over status, because while the statuses are actually really good in wilds, ultimately they're not doing damage in relation to the amount of status on that weapon, and so you want to focus your raw attack. And that would mean your perfect weapon would be 1 sharpness and 4 attack. But getting 2 attack and 2 status is fine, while getting 3 attack and 1 status is amazing. And honestly, getting better than that starts the 100-hour grind for 5 bonus raw. Again, let's put it into perspective. At that point, it is better for you to farm Mega Demon Drugs, because they will give you a 7 raw bonus instead. Elemental Artian weapons, on the other hand, are a little bit more messy. If you remember me talking about a 40-minute version of this video, the length of that largely came down to explaining the way that the Lance is sort of on the fence about prioritizing element or prioritizing raw, and what you want in an Artian weapon to roll will completely depend on a bunch of factors like monster hit zones, how fast the monster attacks you, what kind of attacks you're doing, are you in multiplayer, how much aggro are you getting, what armor set are you using, and importantly, how all of those variables sort of cannibalize and conflict with each other to make a really complicated mess. So, if I said, overall you want to aim for 1 sharpness and 4 attack, then what I'd really be saying is, on the assumption that you're fighting monsters where the ratio of its raw to elemental hit zones is less than 54, while playing solo without a cat to make sure the aggro is on you, and that you're hitting all of your double counters, then an Artian weapon with 4 attack mods is going to be better than an Artian weapon with 4 element mods. But obviously, it only applies in that situation, and if you're in multiplayer and you're spamming medium thrusts, because you're not getting much aggro, or heaven forbid you're using the Corrupted Mantle and getting a whole bunch of extra element attacks, then obviously going for element instead of for attack will be better. But then at this point, we also have to zoom out a little bit, and I have to tell you that we're talking about roughly a 2% damage difference, and at that point, the grind is crazy. Now, I am crazy, and I've done some maths on the assumption that you're also crazy and you want to do some grinding. So, if you want to be here grinding until the heat death of the universe, then what I would recommend is going 1 sharpness and 4 attack on all of your weapons, based on the assumption that you're not using the Corrupted Mantle most of the time, and that the monsters you're hunting are attacking you often enough to make double counter and grand retribution thrust a significant portion of your overall damage, and that by the time you've grinded out all of these weapons, you're going to be pretty skilled at the lance to really focus on getting the really high motion values hit very often. I would also recommend getting another water Artian lance, because there are 2 monsters that are so elementally weak that focusing on element is viable even when accounting for, consistent counterattacks, and both of those are weak to water. If you're even crazier, I'd also recommend getting another set of elemental focused, so I'm talking 1 sharpness and 4 element for all the other weapons as well, because monsters that don't attack you often do exist, especially in the early game, and when you're playing with multiplayer, medium thrust spam starts to be incredibly viable, and it favors element. But I do want to stress that, once more, for the people at the back, if you've only got 1 sharpness, and then a mix of attack and element on your Artian weapons, then the perfect roll is barely better than what you have. And I don't know if it's worth grinding for, unless you are desperate to have something to work towards. I also need to stress that there are so many different factors going on for Artian weapons, and meta sets in general, which means that they're only going to be the correct choice under a very specific set of circumstances. And that specific set of circumstances is more than likely not applicable to how you hunt. And given the way that the lance functions in wilds, where you're really prioritizing getting the 4th hit double counter because that does a load of damage, you can't guarantee what your combo is going to look like in between the double counters, because you want to maximize those windows for damage, obviously, but you don't know how long that window is going to be. And so you could be fighting Arkveld, where he attacks really fast, and you basically only have enough time for 3 medium thrusts. But you could also be fighting a monster that has a lot of time between attacks, where high thrust, medium thrust, high thrust is a much better use of that window. And unfortunately, if you're using lots of medium thrusts, element is quite favorable. Whereas if you're using lots of wide sweeps, raw is more favorable. And so we can't just say, okay, you're always using medium thrust, so element is favorable, and we can't say, oh, you're always using wide sweeps, so raw is favorable, because it's gonna depend on how you're hunting, and that makes recommending stuff really difficult. So that was a long tangent to basically say the best a meta set can ever be is a recommendation, and that is incredibly poignant for how Lance currently is within the game. Again, I've got 40 minutes of explaining this sort of stuff, so maybe we will unpack this further at some point in the future. So if you want to know the secret truth of meta sets, then join the channel and subscribe, and then I'll make the video. Speaking of members, I would like to thank my lovely members. They are awesome, and it is their support that keeps these videos coming. Obligatory, you too can be a member. There are loads of cool perks that you can get access to, like early watchings of videos and behind the scenes stuff, so check it out if you're interested. But anyway, let's get back on topic. So realistically, what you're aiming for is 1 sharpness, and then 4 of either attack or element. Either will be fine, but to be super general about which one you might prefer, if you're lancing solo and you're doing lots of counters, you'll get more bang for your buck with 3 attack and 1 element, so look for the attack, if you decide to keep rolling, of course. While if you're using Lance for multiplayer, then look for element instead of attack. All in all, that's it for me. Don't forget to like and subscribe, comment down below with any questions or tips you might have. The first update for the game is right around the corner as I'm recording this, and assuming that they don't mention layered weapons, then I'm thinking about the non-Artian lances, because hunting in style is pretty cool, and having the same Artian lance gets a bit boring after a while. Although it would also require Santiago offering to sell me a darn commission ticket for that Babel spear, so we'll see. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.